In this video, we're going to deploy an RDS database instance, and we'll start that by clicking Services at the top, and then finding RDS under Database. Once again, on the RDS dashboard, you'll be able to see just a quick count of a few things, including database instances, reserved instances, and then subnet groups that you have, as well as other database-related information here. Anyway, to create a database, sometimes you'll have this overview here, but if you don't, then you can just create database right here. Once again, you have several options to choose from, and we went over Amazon Aurora in a previous video, but just as another quick overview, Amazon Aurora is Postgres and MySQL compatible database, with up to 5 times the throughput of MySQL and 3 times the throughput of Postgres, 6-way replication across 3 availability zones, and plenty of other really cool features. For this example, I'm just going to stick with Amazon Aurora and MySQL 5.6 for now though, and I'll click Next. And on the first Specified Database Details page, the first thing you're going to run into here is the configuration, and the first instance in the configuration is the capacity type. So here you have a few different options. You can choose Provisioned, which is where you provision and manage your server instance sizes. You can also choose Provisioned with Aurora Parallel Query enabled if you want to be able to provision and manage the server instance sizes and have Aurora improve the performance of your analytic queries by pushing processing down to Aurora's storage layer. And then finally, if you want serverless, you can also specify the minimum and maximum number of resources for a cluster, and then Aurora will scale the capacity based on database load. And once again, of course, these options are only available with Aurora. Next, it'll ask for a name for your cluster, a master username, and just some password. Whoops. And we'll continue. And actually, for the purposes of this video, let's go back to database details and let's stick with provisioned. And it'll ask us to choose a database instance class and a database instance identifier. But let's stick with that. And next, just like plenty of other resources in AWS, it'll give us the option to deploy it into a particular VPC, and then in that VPC, a specific subnet if we want. My apologies, a subnet group, which is a group that defines which subnets and IP ranges your database instance can use in that VPC. Next is public accessibility. And if you choose yes here, then your database instance will receive a public DNS name. And of course, if you don't, then it won't, and it won't be publicly routable by default. Next, if you have an availability zone preference, then you can select it here. And if you want, you have the option of either creating a new VPC security group or choosing existing security groups if you'd like. Next, you have the option of setting both a database cluster identifier and a database name. Let's do that now. And if you want something other than the default port of 3306, then you can select that here. Next is your database parameter group. And a default database parameter group is created if you create a database instance without specifying a customer-created database parameter group. But what a parameter group is database parameter groups act as a container for engine configuration values that are applied to one or more database instances. The same for clusters. You can choose a parameter group for one or more clusters as well if you prefer. We're going to leave this default for now and move down to encryption. And if you decide to enable encryption, then it's going to give you a list of your KMS keys that are available to use for encrypting and decrypting that data. You can also disable it and you won't have that option, but we'll just leave it on enabled for now. Failover is if you choose to have read replicas, you have the ability to assign different tiers. And during failover, RDS will promote the replica with the highest priority to primary. And this is where you can set that failover priority. We're going to leave it on no preference for now. Of course, backup retention period means the amount of days that Amazon RDS will keep your database backups. Backtrack is a feature that lets you very quickly move an Aurora database back to a prior point in time, so that you don't need to go through the trouble and the delay of restoring from a backup. And if you enable this, then you can choose a target backtrack window up to 72 hours. And if you do decide to enable Backtrack, I would definitely look at pricing for that as well, because there will be a cost incurred for storing the records that you need to use with Backtrack. Enhanced monitoring is if you just want enhanced monitoring metrics. Those are really useful if you want to see how your processors are running in your database instance or which threads are using the CPU. And if you do enable that, then it'll ask for a monitoring role, which you can leave as default. And if you leave it as default, then you're authorizing RDS to create a role for you. And then, of course, your granularity, or how often that will update for you. And next here, you can choose the types of logs that you want RDS to deploy to Amazon CloudWatch. And here, if you have a reason to, then you can disable auto minor version upgrades, which will mean that RDS won't automatically upgrade to new minor versions as they're released. Next, if you have a preferred maintenance window, then you can set that here. And finally, just like with EC2 instances, you can enable deletion protection so that you can't accidentally click on your RDS database in the console and delete it. But we're going to leave that alone for now. And that's all there is to it. Hit Create Database, and it will take just a moment, so we'll place this video on a brief pause and be right back with you. And here is a completed RDS database instance. This is different from the one I just created, but it'll absolutely give us the information we need. So you can see the engine that we're using, as well as the database instance class, how it's doing status-wise, so this one is available, and if it's pending maintenance. On the RDS dashboard, you also get a quick shortcut to your CloudWatch logs that are relevant to RDS, including CPU utilization, your database connections, and all kinds of really helpful logs. And next is connectivity. So if you chose your RDS to be publicly available, then you'll have the yes here, and you'll have an endpoint, and if not, you won't, and your port there. You'll also see any security groups that you decided to apply your instance to, and then the rest of your advanced details and configuration details. Now, when I'm developing applications in AWS and I'm running into any kind of issues with RDS, particularly connectivity issues with RDSs that are behind virtual private clouds, then it's this details section that I find myself in most of all. Because if I'm having trouble connecting to RDS, it's usually something like a VPC issue, a subnet issue, or a security group issue. Next, if you decided to deploy replicas, then you'll see them here in the replication section. Similarly to CloudWatch alarms, if you want to create or deploy any CloudWatch alarms, they'll show up here. And CloudWatch alarms allow you to send notifications either to an ARN of an SNS topic or a new email address on all kinds of really helpful metrics. So if you're exceeding any of your CPU utilization, if you want to monitor your database connections or anything like that, then you have the ability to do that here and create an alarm. And we won't cover every section on this page, but a few more really useful things. The snapshots, if you ever want to check out an existing snapshot or create a new one, then you'll do that here. And finally, you do have some MySQL or engine-specific logs on the bottom of your RDS dashboard as well. And these are really useful because I've absolutely found myself looking at these in the past when troubleshooting RDS. And that'll wrap it up for creating RDS instances. So if all of that makes sense, then feel free to move on.